Hello everyone. My talk is about an introduction to Burp Suite. So if you've already used Burp Suite, you're probably going to find this a bit boring because it is an introduction, so sorry in advance. Mandatory presenter information. Professionally, I work as a security consultant. I've previously also worked as a security consultant at F-Secure/MWR. I've been on the other side of the table running internal security at a small company called Aramco. Not Aramco, do not confuse them, that's a little bit bigger than the company I worked at. And before that, I worked on paper as a vulnerability researcher, but in reality more of a technical writer at DSTL, which is part of Ministry of Defence. I worked more on explosive ordnance disposal robotics than cybersecurity, so yeah, interesting career history, I guess. I've got MSc in cybersecurity, bachelor's in robotics and artificial intelligence, and mandatory, I done my OSCP. In my personal time, I volunteer in Ukraine quite a bit, so I ramble about Ukraine a lot. I'm doing a bit of a midlife crisis, so I'm doing an MA in folklore. I'm into just a bunch of shit. I'm going to be wandering around all day, so if you see me, please come bug me, talk to me about whatever. I'm the one in the Bigfoot hoodie, if that helps you identify me. I'm also organiser of B-Sides Basingstoke. Tickets are on sale now if you want to come down to Amazingstoke. It's a smaller conference down in Basingstoke, which is 45 minutes out of London, so it's reasonably easy to get to. And I'm a DEF CON scavenger hunt judge, which is different from the scavenger hunt here. However, I will be going and critiquing their list with professional skills. So let's talk about Burp Suite. This is a Burp Suite. It's a software package that's designed for penetration testing. There is a free version, there is a premium version. The premium version's about £500, I think. I'm not seeing any orange t-shirts here, so I assume Portswigger aren't here, the company that makes it, so...
They are downstairs.
Yeah, no, but they're not here to hear me shit-talking about how, you're making it. Yeah, they already gave me a t-shirt, so they've tried to bribe me. It's genuinely a very good bit of software. The free version is pretty good. It's got a few bits of functionality that are limited, which I'll gripe about at the relevant points. But the idea of Burp Suite is that it'll let you intercept traffic and mess with it before it goes to a website so that you can mess with a website more easily. Graphics design is my passion. You've probably heard that the internet is a series of tubes. So you've got your person on the left, they're on their computer, they want to go to Wikipedia, they put in the browser, wikipedia.com. In the old times, that would have gone on port 80, which is basically just a way of the server managing lots of different connections and lots of different services. It just has a series of tubes that different things can go into. So you'll reach out to the server and say, hey, give me this website. Server replies and is like, okay, here's your website. Burp Suite sits in between you/your browser and the server. So when the web server is serving things on port 80, you'll have Burp Suite set up listening on your local host, like your local computer, on whatever port you want. Normally it's 8080. I think that's the default. So when you go to your web browser, instead of going to wikipedia.com, you'll go to localhost 8080. You'll configure it so that your traffic is going through it. I'm really bad at doing this, explanation bit. Yeah, the TLDR, it's going to proxy the data. You're configuring it so that your traffic is going to port 8080 on localhost. Burp Suite grabs it, and then you can mess around with it in Burp Suite. It sends it out to the web server, and it'll also proxy it on the way back so that you can mess around with the data on its return. But generally, it's the data that's outgoing that's a bit more fun to faff with. Some security controls will be implemented in the browser, such as checking the validity of the data that the user's entered. So if you're kind of catching the data after it's left the browser, but before it's being sent to the server, you can mess with it and bypass any client-side set checks, which is cool. Because this is an intro, I'm going to talk about the difficult way to set up Burp Suite for proxying. It does have an inbuilt browser, which is like a one-click solution now, which makes life easier. But if you want to set it up the old-fashioned way, you go to the proxy tab, and then under that proxy settings, you'll see that the default is 127.0.0.1.8080, which is localhost. So, again, your local computer is listening on port 8080. So when you then go to your browser and reconfigure it to proxy, i.e. send all data to 127.0.0.1.8080. For this little bit of example, I'm using Firefox because it lets you faff around with the proxy directly in it. Other browsers like Chrome, you have to use the system proxy. Portswigger, the company that does Burp Suite, on their website have guides to doing it with various browsers and operating systems, so I'd say follow them. Once you've set up the proxy, if you try going on a random website, you'll probably get this certificate error because the browser is detecting that the data is being intercepted. So to fix that, you've got to install the certificate for Burp Suite. If you go to Burp Suite in your browser, in the top right, there's this little CA certificate button. You click that, download your certificate. There's your certificate. Because nothing's simple, you can't just click the import button. You have to go search for certificate in the settings of your browser, and then you can add it as an authority there. It's a bit of a faff. There's guides on their website, but honestly, the easiest way to do it is to just click the Open Browser button, and it'll open you their browser that's automatically configured to proxy data through Burp, and it just makes life easier. So I'm going to talk about the OS Juice Shop, which is a deliberately vulnerable web app. A deliberately vulnerable juice shop. It's got so many different vulnerabilities in it. I think there's examples of pretty much everything you could hope to see on a website. They mentioned in the intro earlier that someone's going to be doing a talk on Juice Shop later in the day as a replacement one when someone's dropped out. So would recommend going to that because Juice Shop's really cool. You can get it online quite easily. They now have a Docker image, so you can very easily just pull the Docker image down and then, run it. So would recommend this for learning how to do web security things. Here is the Juice Shop. Yeah, it's a juice shop. It's cool. So I'm using that today as an example for what you can do with the different functionality in Burp Suite. So at some points, the examples can be slightly contrived because, when the only tool you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I've got the Juice Shop here, so everything's kind of mashed to be compatible with Juice Shop. So one of the first tabs we've got on Burp Suite is the Target tab. You can see, along the top, we've got all the various tabs, and then when you click on them, they've often got, sub-menus. So under Target, the main one you might see is the sitemap. And that's just logging all the different websites you've been to and all the pages you've been to on it. You can right-click on that and add to scope, and now it's in your target scope. And that's a filter that's used by lots of different bits of functionality within Burp Suite. So if you didn't want to save every single web request to every website that you're going on, you just configure it to only log things going to whatever the target is. In this case, it's localhost because that's where I've got Juice Shop running. Or there's just a lot of filtering you can do with this, so it's worth setting up the target scope. If we go back to the sitemap, again, we can just see a list of all of the different things we've been to on the left. So in this view, we've got a request and a response. And this is essentially what the computers are communicating in. So when you go to the website, it's generating a GET request off to that website, which has a bunch of different bits of metadata attached to it, like what browser you're using, the browser agent, any cookies that have been set, which might be like your access tokens, session tokens. And in response, the server will send back the bit that's in the bottom right, which is the response. And that's kind of essentially the view that you're dealing with most of the time in Burp Suite. You're looking at the actual text that's being generated by your browser and sent to the server, and then you're seeing the actual text that's being sent back to you by the server. If we had the premium version of Burp Suite for the low price of £495 per user per year, we would have an extra view on the right, which gives the issues list. So it automatically tries to detect some issues with the website as you're browsing around. It can be things like if it detects credit card numbers, it thinks everything's a credit card number, so it'll always pop with that one. Email addresses, things like server response headers that haven't been configured correctly. And if you work at some consultancies, you then just copy-paste that into a report and receive £5,000, and that's how you pay for your Burp license. So it's not included in the free functionality. I don't think you really need it for, if you're doing a CTF or you're just messing around and learning, but it's a nice to have when you've got the premium version. Proxy tab. So we've got the HTTP history tab here, which is all the shit that you've been doing. So you can see, like, there's a bunch of stuff in there. When you go to a page on a website, it's probably going to be going, okay, we need the CSS. We need, to make calls to this random API. You need to call to the logging thing. And all of that gets included in here. There is, at the top, this filter settings thing. You can click on that and then you can filter. Say you want to look at functionality relating to login. You could search for /login or wherever the login lives and just see that. In this case, we can see we've got this rest/admin/application-configuration. And admin, that sounds interesting. So we click it, and again, we see the request response pair that's been generated there. In this case, we can see the full GET request, and we can see the response. And it's quite a lengthy looking response. Again, I'm being slightly contrived because I've got to fit the examples in with Juice Shop. If we scroll down, we can start seeing lots of interesting things on there. For instance, there's this security text section, which has like /hash/scoreboard, which, that's interesting. If we go back to the browser, we go to that, and we found the scoreboard. Yay, that's your first flag on the Juice Shop done. So again, shout out to Juice Shop. They've got a scoreboard where they give you, I guess it gives you a bit of a hint on what you should be looking for on the platform. If you want to be like, okay, what can I do with this? It's a good starting place. OWASP also do a ebook, and also I think now just a website, which has solutions to all of these challenges. So very good learning resource. When I was flicking through it, trying to find things to mash into this, there was a couple where I was like, I've not done that before. So would recommend playing around with Juice Shop. But you can also intercept your requests in real time. In that tab we were just looking at, we were seeing a log of all of the things we'd browsed to in the browser, right? So there's this intercept off button that we've got currently on the intercept tab. If we click that, intercept is on. So now we go to a page on the web browser and the request is kind of being stuck here. We can click the forward button if we want to send it, and we can also see the responses we're getting from the client are hanging here. For websites that send a ton of stuff, like, it gets very annoying very quickly, which is a reason to use the target scope, because then you can limit it to just see things that are in scope. You don't care if it's sending off to a bunch of logging shit that, you don't really want to look at. So, in this case, it's a juice shop. You can add juice to your basket. So if we go into the app and we click to add a whatever juice to our basket, we can see that the request being generated by our browser is here. At the bottom of it, ultimately, product ID, which is for that juice, basket ID, and quantity. So maybe we could start messing with those values. Like, what if we make the quantity -1? We then forward it on, and we've got -1 apple pommes in our basket. You don't tend to see this too much in the real world nowadays, because people do okay input validation. I suppose with all the vibe-coded things, maybe they don't, but yeah. So we can see here now we've got -1 in our basket. In theory, the website owes us money. It's a cool bit of functionality to be able to intercept requests and mess with them before we send them onto the website. Intruder tab. Yeah, every time you get a flag on Juice Shop, it pops up with this thing you have to click off, and it's kind of annoying, but whatever. So if we go back to our HTTP history tab, we can just grab a random request, it doesn't really matter which one, and we can right-click, and you get this submenu pop up. In this case, we're going to send it to Intruder. Intruder is a bit of functionality in Burp Suite that I use quite a lot in the premium version, that lets you just spam a bunch of data at the website. You can do a bunch of, fancy conditional formatting on things. You can, have some templating stuff, which is quite interesting. For this, because it's introduction to Burp Suite, we're not going to be covering that. So the way it works is you highlight a section of the request, and you click this little add, I don't know what the symbol's got, simoleons? I don't know what it's called. And it puts these symbols either side, and that's indicating to the server that that's the bit that you should be replacing. To the tool that's the bit you should be replacing. In this case, I put it to the left of the /, which I shouldn't have. I fix it in one of the other slides. So if you've got the premium version, Burp Suite comes preloaded with a bunch of word lists, which some of them are pretty good, some of them are kind of shit. But otherwise, just go to a website like SecLists. They've got a ton of different lists for every occasion. In this case, we've gone for the directory one. Theirs is like thousands of lines long. I've just grabbed like the first, however, I think 20 or something items off of it, just for demonstration purposes. So back in Burp Suite, we can tell it that we're just doing a simple list. Well, this time we're doing a simple list, but you can do iterating numbers. So earlier on that request, we saw that it was basket number 26. Maybe we could iterate through all of the potential numbers and find other people's baskets. Who knows? In this one, yeah, we're just going for the simple list. I have pasted in my list of words there. So this isn't one of my gripes with the free version of the functionality, is they deliberately rate limit it. I think you can only send one request per second, which is very slow if you're doing larger lists. So if you're using the free version, at this point you're probably going to go over to a tool like Dirbuster or GoBuster, something free that doesn't rate limit you in annoying ways. But with the premium version, it just makes life easier because it's already there, the lists are already saved, and it's not rate limited. You just set it off and go. So here we've highlighted our bit on the left where we're going to be replacing with the data on the right. So the first one's going to be going to /index, then it's /images, etc., etc. We click the Start Attack button, and we can see our attack. So we can see this big list of the requests that we've sent, and what the status code is, i.e. did it work or not, and the length of the response. With these ones that have the response length of 10370, they tend to just be nothing exciting. That seems to be the default it returns. So a lot of the time we're going to be looking for anything of a different length. In this case, we can find that /metrics returns a really long length, and if we click on it and look at the request and response, we can see it's returning some interesting stuff. So there's flags on Juice Shop associated with that. We can also see that /ftp found something a bit different. So with things that we've discovered here, we can throw them into other bits of functionality within Burp, or you could just straight up go to it in the browser, like they've discovered it's /ftp, so we go there, and we see interesting things in a file store on the server. So there's another flag for you for Juice Shop. Another bit of functionality that I use a lot of the time is the repeater tab. So going back to that menu we saw before, we can right-click and send to repeater. In this case, I'm doing the login post request. So when you log in, you're sending your username and password, and the server's responding with, either unauthorized or, yep, okay, cool, you passed, here's your session token. So repeater is just a way to make it easier to rapidly test stuff. I can type whatever I want in my request and press send, and it sends it and I see the response. Like, if I'm just going to be rapidly testing for a particular vulnerability, it's an easy way to just sit and kind of hammer out a bunch of data that I'm manually testing rather than something like Intruder where, it's a big list that's pre-made. Because sometimes you're going to change what you're doing based on the response you get, right? So in Juice Shop, there is an SQL injection vulnerability. So SQL, it's just databases, and it probably won't work like this in the real world again, but we're doing a bit of a historical, SQL injection. So when someone's trying to log into this server that's got all users stored in an SQL database, a query such as this one at the top might be being ran by the server. So it's taking the two bits of red data that we've submitted, username admin and password and if that whole thing evaluates to true, then, cool, you're allowed in, here's your session token. But what if we can insert bits of data that look like they're SQL queries into the fields that are being inserted into the query? So the apostrophe character gets interpreted as the end of, that part of the query, and, the dash is kind of a, we're done, end of line thing. So in this case, it's just an SQL query that will always evaluate to true, because 1 = 1 is always true. Therefore, the query is always going to evaluate to true. So when you send it that, it responds with a session token. In this case, it gives you the session token for the first user in their database, which happens to be the admin user. So it means that you can then go into the website, log in, and you're the admin user. Yay! But because it gave us their username right in the response, I don't know why it returns the username. We can see that the email address of that account is admin@juice-sh.op. So we could take that into Intruder and just run through a bunch of different passwords. So we've got the email address, we're leaving that the same, but the password field we're changing every time, and we're using Intruder to try a bunch of different passwords. Again, it's slow as shit on the free version, so you're not going to do that in the real world, but it's a good bit of functionality to know about how to do. And in this case, we can discover that it returns as 200 status code when we use the password admin123. So now we know that admin password's email password. Yay! Collaborator tab is another bit of functionality we don't get in the free version. We are too poor for this. It's a little server that will be set up so that if you're trying to do something on the web server that might make it reach out to a different website, you just have an easy way of seeing if it's actually reaching out. So something that kind of does the same thing is just webhook.site. You go to it, it gives you this URL with a UUID. If anything then goes to that URL, it pops up in this bit on the left here. So if you're trying to exfiltrate some data or literally just check, hey, is it reaching out to this web server that I've supplied? It's a good way to check it. But if you've got the premium version, multiple of you working on the same project and stuff, it can be nice to have it set up in Collaborator. Sequencer tab is one that I admit I don't really use too much, and there isn't really a super appropriate use of it in Juice Shop. The idea of this is to try and figure out if values are being generated randomly or not. So, because I'm doing this part-time degree, one of the university systems I log into, you don't have a username and password, you put your email address in and it emails you a link that you use to access it. And every time I look at it, it sends 5 characters that it uses as the login code, and they're not random. There's no way they're random. They always look so similar. So if I wanted, I could rig things up to try and use this to see how random they actually are and see if I can figure out any patterns with it. Just for demonstrative purposes, I'm using the session token, which is a JWT. It's basically just a kind of common way of doing of handling authorization tokens or authentication tokens, where it's the username and password and, well, not the password, but it's just a bunch of encapsulated data that's base 64 encoded. So it's formatted very consistently, so it's going to look similar for each user, whatever. Here, we're sending to Sequencer. We can now see it in our thing. So at the bottom, we go to Configure, and we can see the request the response that the server is sending. We highlight the JWT, but if you were testing, the generation of a 2FA code or something, just you highlight whatever field you're trying to evaluate if it's random or not, or how random it is. You click OK, and it will then generate a bunch of requests that are basically the same as the original one you sent, and it'll take all of that field from the responses and do some statistical analysis on it for you. So in this case, they're not random because we didn't anticipate them to be, but if you did have a bunch of tokens which were probably, it's a bit of a niche use case, but you could use this to figure out if things are being generated randomly or just pseudo-randomly or not even close to pseudo-randomly like I think the university system ones are. Decoder tab. Another bit of functionality on Juice Shop. They have this photo wall, but the first image is broken on it. So if we right-click and inspect it, we can open it in a new tab, and we can see that the URL for the image looks like this. It's got a cat in it. That is valid. You can have a cat in your URL if you want, but it's got a couple of hash symbols, or hashtags, I think we call them now. So those are going to be interpreted by the browser as web anchors. So on Wikipedia and stuff where you've got life, death, scandals sections, when you're clicking on those links, it's kind of essentially putting the URL hashtag life, hashtag death, and jumping to those areas of the page. However, if you have a hashtag in a file name, that's fine. The computer can interpret it normally. So what we need to do here is make the website interpret those hashtags as a URL rather than interpret them as though they're part of the image title, image name, rather than as though they are like anchor characters in the URL. So we have the decoder tab. It's quite cool. It lets you decode and encode things as base64, URL, hex, octal. Yeah, it's something that you can do with a bunch of other tools. You can do it on websites, but it's nice because it's just there. You've got something that you want to check the encoding of or decode. You can just click the decoder tab, put it in, and it's very easy to do. So if we encode the hash symbol as a URL, we can see that it's actually a %23. So if we go back and change out the hash symbols in the URL to the %23, they're going to be interpreted correctly, and it now correctly loads the picture of the guy's cat, and you get another flag on Juice Shop. Compare tab is another one where a bunch of other things could do this, but because it's there, it just makes life easy. So going back to those JWTs, because JWTs are just base 64 encoded, well, essentially they're base 64 encoded, you can shove them into decoder, decode as base 64, and you'll be able to see the data that's gone into it. So things like the algorithm that's being used to sign it. In this case, we've got some kind of hash of the password. We've got the username, blah, blah, blah. If you wanted to compare the values of two JWTs you've decoded, you can shove them both in this. There's the paste button in the top right. It just pastes it in. You click compare, and yeah, it highlights the differences between the two. I use this sometimes when, like, web requests... Sometimes I'll see web requests and they'll be like, this one's 26,800 characters and this one's 26,900 characters. I'm not going to sit and scroll through both of those trying to figure out what's different. So it's nice to have an easy visual indicator. I can shove them in and it'll highlight it in orange and I'm like, okay, that's what changed. Cool. Logger tab, again, it kind of does what it says on the tin. It logs all your requests. Other requests that are generated by things like... Intruder, so the tool that lets you spam a bunch of data at it, don't get put in that HTTP proxy tab we saw at the start. So if you kind of went, oh shit, what did it say when I did that earlier? You can go over to the logger tab. The logger tab does have a filter, a search on it, but I think it's another premium feature. So if you actually want to be able to search logger, you got to give Burp Suite money. So yeah, but it's nice to have options. There's the organizer tab. I think they should do a localization where they spell it correctly, but that's just me being British. It's a nice little place that you can shove requests you might come back to later. You can just right-click, send to organizer, and then later on, come back to it and find the request easily. You can also do color coding when they're in the HTTP request log thing. You can right-click and set colors, so I sometimes do that so I can easily find things again. But it's a nice bit of functionality to exist. Extensions are a way that Burp Suite really shines. There's a absolute ton of pre-made ones that you can install. Sometimes companies will have their own slightly cursed internal ones. You'll get people who have made ones themselves. There's just endless possibilities with it. Some of them will need you to install Gyphon. You go to the website, you download it and install it. You just configure the settings on Burp Suite with the location of the Gyphon.jar, which, it's there. Cool. Something that's useful is Authorize. It's an extension on there which just lets you, it basically, when you're browsing through the website, it will regenerate a copy of the request you've sent using any session tokens that you've supplied to it. So it's an easy way for confirming, who has access to what. You could be like, okay, can user 1, user 2, user 3 all access the same page? It'll tell you. So it's pretty useful for that. There's also a Learn tab, which links to their website. Portswigger do some very nice online learning and mini courses and mini labs, so I would recommend checking it out. Okay, I got the 1-minute notification, so I'm basically done. Come say hi to me. You can talk to me about Bigfoot or whatever you want. I did a previous session like this at B-Sides Aberystwyth, where I made a little blog post of how to set up VirtualBox and how to download Juice Shop and get it working, so check that out if you want. I am at Vic Harkness. You can follow me on the Twitters, social media, whatever. And B-Sides Basingstoke tickets now on sale. Please come to B-Sides Amazingstoke. It's our 5-year anniversary, so it's a very exciting one. Yeah. Thank you.